Hey everyone, I'm Nick Rafter and welcome to Here's a Wild Thought. I know it's been a while since you've seen me, and I wanted to take an opportunity to get back into the podcast mode and for you to visually be able to see me again. I was going to write an article about the elections this week and my predictions for them, but I thought this would be a good chance for me to reintroduce the podcast and for you to see me again. I have some interesting predictions for the elections tomorrow. I think it's going to be a Democratic sweep, and I'll explain why in a moment. I'm also going to explain why I think the Republicans should kill the filibuster to reopen the government. And it has nothing to do with me wanting the government to reopen or wanting the Republicans to win this battle. I recognize that even though I think the battle was a wrong one for the Democrats to fight, they are winning it. But I think that killing the filibuster is something that has to happen anyway. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But first, let's talk about the elections. So tomorrow there are several big elections. The New York City mayoral election, where I am, is the biggest one. And there's governor's races in New Jersey and Virginia, other statewide races in Virginia, the House of Delegates in Virginia, the retention races for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which are extremely important. I'll get into why. And the election, the referendum rather, to redistrict California's lines in retribution for Texas and other states like North Carolina redrawing their lines to favor Republicans. So let's get right into it. I think, first of all, New York City, I'm predicting an easy win for Zohran Mamdani. I think he'll win by about 10 points, which is a bit less than most polls that have been showing him. I have to say that turnout in New York City so far in the early vote has been astronomical, and we could be looking at the highest turnout of any mayoral election since 1969. Turnout usually is between 1 million and 1.5 million people in every election. It dipped to about just over 1 million in 2013. Usually that's because the general election is not competitive. The Democratic primary is competitive. Whoever wins that usually sails to the election in November. Republicans just don't vote. People who don't like Democratic candidate just doesn't vote. They accept that the Democrat wins, and that's the end of that. This is a rare competitive election because you have Zohran Mamdani, the assemblyman from Astoria, Queens, who won the Democratic primary in June and is the Democratic nominee, but his opponent in the primary, and who was defeated, former Governor Andrew Cuomo, is running on his own party line. And the Republican Curtis Silva, who ran against Eric Adams 4 years ago, is running as a Republican. So you have a three-way race, and because it's a competitive race for three candidates, we're seeing high turnout that we don't normally see in a mayoral election. So far, almost 800,000 people have turned out to vote. That number might be a little bit higher depending on how many mail-ins we've gotten. The BOE hasn't counted them yet. At least 735,000 have voted early. We assume there's probably about 80,000 mail-in ballots that have been mailed in or will be mailed in. So turnout roughly about 800,000 right now. Usually turnout in the early vote is about 35 to 40% of total turnout. Most voters vote on election day. That's increasingly becoming closer to 50% in every election in New York. Last year for the presidential was about 42%. So it's possible you could see about 50% turnout early versus on election day. But if it goes sort of 55-45, which is what I'm expecting it to be, that means roughly about 900,000 to 1 million people will turn out to vote on Tuesday, tomorrow. And that would bring turnout to around 1.8 million to 1.9 million. We could cross 2 million votes as well. The last time we had 2 million voters in a mayoral election was 1969, which also was a three-way race between incumbent mayor John Lindsay, who left the Republican Party, and then a Republican candidate, John Marchi of Staten Island, and the Democratic candidate, Mario Procaccino, who was a conservative Democrat. And Lindsay won the mayoral election that year for a second term with over 1 million votes, and he's the last mayoral candidate actually to get over 1 million votes. The highest turnout since then was in 1989, which was a extremely high turnout election, competitive race between David Dinkins and the Democrat, who had defeated Ed Koch in the primary, and Republican Rudy Giuliani. And that race, 1.85 million people turned out, and Dinkins narrowly won that election, winning about 917,000 votes. That's the total that I'm going to look at tomorrow when I'm looking at how many votes the winning candidate gets. I expect that Zohran Mamdani will finish right around 50% or a little bit under. My prediction is for him to get about 48% to about 38% for Andrew Cuomo, and the rest for Curtis Silva, with some scatterings for Eric Adams and Jim Walden and other candidates who are still on the ballot even though they dropped out of the race. If Mamdani gets to 50% with a 2 million turnout, that means he'll get about 1 million votes. If he crosses David Dinkins' 917,000, I think that's actually a really good result for him. It'd be a smashing result for him to get over 1 million votes. So that's why I'm keeping an eye out there. I think on the city council, Republicans might gain a seat or two. I think they're likely to gain the seat of Robert Holden in Queens. Now, Holden was basically a Republican anyway. He sat in the Democratic caucus, but he endorsed Curtis Silber. He endorsed Donald Trump. The race to succeed him is between two of his staffers, actually. Democrat Phil Wong, who won the primary in June, and Alicia Valchunas, who was his former chief of staff, I believe. Holden hasn't endorsed either one of them, but my sense is that Alicia Valchunas will win the seat, only because there's likely to be a massive backlash in this district to Mamdani. This district includes Middle Village, Maspeth, Glendale. It's a very sort of ethnically white conservative district with a lot of growing Latino populations. It went to Trump in the presidential election. It went to Lee Zeldin in the governor's election. So I think there's likely to be enough of a backlash that will allow Valchunas to win the race. Now, Phil Wong could win, and if he wins, it's going to be on the back of a growing Asian American population in the district that probably will also vote for either Silva or Cuomo. But my sense in this district is that a lot of the more conservative Asians will probably not vote because they don't really like Andrew Cuomo either, so they'll probably won't be part of the 2 million turnout that we're seeing, and that Valchunas will probably squeeze by and win the election just on turnout against Mamdani. District does include part of Ridgewood, which was Mamdani's best area in the primary, so it's possible that a Mamdani surge in Ridgewood could allow Phil Wong to win just simply on the people voting down ballot for the entire Democratic ticket, which would be ironic considering that Phil Wong is actually quite a conservative Democrat who does not support many of Mamdani's policies. So it's a race to watch, and my prediction is the Republicans will win it, but I'm not 100% certain of that. The Republicans are also defending their council seats, Christine Marmorato in the Bronx, Vicky Palladino in Queens, and they're likely to be reelected. I think Marmorato, she could potentially lose. She's the first Republican to win a seat in the Bronx in over 20 years. She won basically in an upset a few years ago over housing. She has a very strong opponent, and it's possible that some of Mamdani's excitement could bleed over into the Albanian community in that part of the Bronx, and they could deliver the race to the Democrat. This is actually part of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's congressional district, so it'll be interesting to see if she can get out enough votes in the Bronx for Mamdani that could also allow Democrats to win the seat. Turnout in the early vote in the Bronx is usually very bad, but it's been pretty okay in that part of the borough, so we'll see what happens there. The other race to watch is the race in Bay Ridge. I think the Democratic candidate, Kayla Santos-Suoso, will probably win that seat because it includes a large Palestinian population in that district that's going to come out strongly for Mamdani, I believe. And I don't think the Republicans will be able to keep up in terms of their turnout because Cuomo isn't popular there and Curtis Silva is not going to win. So I think the Democrat will hold that seat as well. Now, that's my prediction for New York. Obviously, the public advocates race will be won by Juanita Williams and the comptroller's race by Mark Levine, and that takes care of New York. There are suburban races in New York. The county executive of Nassau County and the county legislature is up as well. I think Republicans will hold on there, although some Democrats in Nassau County are telling me that they feel somewhat positive about the county executive race. I'm not sure whether to believe them or not. I haven't been tuned into Nassau politics recently. So I do know that they're trying to get turnout there. I do know that Donald Trump, who did pretty well on Long Island last year, is not holding up well on Long Island politically. And we'll see what happens there as well. I think the reaction to Mamdani in the suburbs will probably help the Republicans a lot there because there's a lot of polarization in Long Island against the city. When the city votes left, Long Island votes right. So I'm not looking to see any Democratic upsets in Long Island. As far as New Jersey goes, I know this is a race that Republicans believe that they have a chance of winning. I'm looking at the early vote in New Jersey. I don't see how they win this unless they have an unprecedented turnout on Election Day or a significant number of Democratic defections, both of which are possible, but highly unlikely in this political climate. I think Mikey Sherrill, the Democratic candidate for New Jersey governor, wins this race by about 8 points. That's my prediction. She could win it by double digits, considering how well Democrats have done in the early vote. Last year in the presidential race, in which Kamala Harris won the state by 6 points, Republicans were able to win the early vote in 5 of the 9 days that there was early vote in New Jersey. This time, they've only won it 1 day by less than a point on Monday. Democrats have otherwise dominated the early vote. They're dominating the mail-in vote. The last day of early and mail-in vote hasn't fully come in yet, but it's likely to end up somewhere in the neighborhood of 280 to 290,000 votes firewall that Michael Sears-Earle will have going into the election, which means that Jack Ciattarelli, the Republican candidate, would need something like a 2-to-1 margin on election day in order to overcome that, I think, when you look at what the projected turnout will be. So my prediction is Sears-Earle by 8. I think that the state House of Representatives, the state assembly, General Assembly, which is what the New Jersey legislature is called, Democrats might lose a couple seats there. I think it's probably going to end up one seat gain either way, depending on what happens in the 3rd district in South Jersey and in the 4th district in South Jersey. So I would look at that to be sort of a status quo election. It's possible Democrats could pick up 3 or 4 seats in the state assembly if it goes the right way, but I don't foresee that happening. Moving to Virginia, though, I see a Democratic sweep happening there. I know there's a lot of talk about the Republican, Jason Miyares, winning the Attorney General race, and I think he probably has about a 40 to 45% chance of winning. But I think considering that Abigail Spanberger is likely to win by double digits, I think she's likely to have coattails to pull him over. I'm predicting Abigail Spanberger, the Democratic candidate, will defeat the Republican candidate, Winsome Sears-Earle, by about 12 points, which would be the largest margin for any Democrat in Virginia since 2018, and the largest margin for a governor's race in I don't know how long, really long time, 30 years, I think. In the lieutenant governor's race, I think Democrat Ghazala Hazmi, who is running against Republican John Reed, will easily also defeat him. I know some polls have shown it close. Hazmi has been a terribly good campaigner. She skipped a debate, which was kind of embarrassing for her campaign. But Spanberger is leading with such a big margin, I think she pulls the rest of the ticket over. And very typically, the 3 races in Virginia, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, they don't really end very far apart from each other. They tend to be somewhat in line. 4 years ago, the Republicans won all 3 races by less than 2 points. As far as the attorney general's race, though, that's a more interesting problem for the Democrats because their candidate, Jay Jones, made news after the Charlie Kirk assassination when it came out that he had sent text messages that actually called for violence against Republicans. It was a stand in his campaign. He had narrowly won a primary. A lot of Democrats in Virginia were not happy that he was nominated. He ran against Democrat Shannon Taylor, who many Democrats thought was a stronger candidate. I think the margin of Spanberger's victory will probably pull him over, but he will run far behind both Spanberger and Hazmi. I think he'll win by about 4 points. That's my prediction, which would be pretty substantial, but there is a possibility, I would say about 45% possibility, that the Republican candidate could still win. The reason I think Jay Jones will end up winning is I think a lot of Democrats will end up voting for him despite what he allegedly said, simply because they want a Democratic attorney general. I think we're in a position now where Democrats are not willing to throw winnable elections over these moral stances and ethical stances, and I think the important thing about having a Democratic attorney general during the Trump administration will be enough for them to vote for Jones. So I think that he'll probably pull out the win there. In the House of Delegates, I think that there's going to be about a 10 to 12 seat gain for the Democrats. Right now I'm seeing, 9 to 12 seat gain. I think 9 is probably what they're leaning in now. I think with enough of a Democratic wave, they can pull 12 seat wins, and that would give them a strong majority of over 60 seats to the Republicans falling below 40 seats in the House of Delegates. There's no state Senate election in Virginia this year, unfortunately, but the Democrats still hold a 2-seat majority there. What's really helping the Democrats, I think, and really sort of pushing some momentum towards the end is the push to redistrict Virginia. State Senator, President Louise Lucas made some news on social media when she suggested that she might push to redraw Virginia's congressional lines to draw out most of the Republicans in the delegation in retribution for North Carolina, Missouri, and Texas redrawing their lines in favor of Republicans. Virginia can't do this because of a constitutional amendment, but there is a way for them to overturn this, at least the Democrats believe there is, if they pass a constitutional amendment before Tuesday that would call for the lines to be redrawn, which they did, or are about to do, and then pass it again in the next legislature next year. They could redraw the lines to 2026. And it looks like they're going to do that. The question is whether they draw out all but one Republican or all but two. Lucas seems to think that she can draw out all but one. So that, I think, is driving a lot of Democrat votes in Virginia now. Anger over the shutdown because so many federal jobs in Virginia. That also is driving them. So I expect a Democratic sweep in the state. I do think that a lot of Democrats are suffering from some sort of electoral PTSD, where they think that a landslide's coming and all the evidence points to one, but they're worried about an upset anyway. Trump voters or Republican voters are very mysterious. They show up, they don't show up. You really know if they're going to show up or not. You don't know where they came from. The hidden Trump voter has, I think, really spooked a lot of Democrats into thinking that they might lose elections that they seem favored to win. And so, I make these predictions with the caveat that I feel very sort of uneasy going into this election at the Democratic prospects, but I think that the evidence pretty much points to a Democratic sweep. Out in California, speaking of redistricting, where California is seeking to change their law in order to allow them to redistrict out several Republicans in retribution for what happened in Texas and Missouri and North Carolina, the proposition to do that, early on looked like it was going to be dicey, but now I think it's going to pass by about 20 points. Democratic turnout in the state has been incredibly good, even in former Republican strongholds like Orange County. And so I think it'll pass by about 20 points, which will be a huge victory for the Democrats and for California Governor Gavin Newsom, who I think we all know wants to run for president in 2028. So that's the big elections that are happening tomorrow. There's also an election in Pennsylvania where the voters are voting to whether or not to retain 3 of the Democratic Supreme Court justices in the state. This is extremely important because Democrats want to keep control of the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania to make sure Republicans don't have the ability to sort of mess with election laws or redraw lines or that type of thing. And so I think that Democrats will retain their Supreme Court justices there. Democratic turnout is pretty good in Pennsylvania. There was a recent report that showed for the first time they're actually gaining voters registrations in the state for the first time in like 5 years. So I think things are going well over there as well. So I'm expecting to see a big Democratic night and a big Democratic sweep. And I say that with the same caveat that I'm still feeling the PTSD of past elections. And, if I'm wrong, I would not be shocked. And I think part of that comes from the shutdown. I think everyone sort of has entertained the reality that Democrats are winning the shutdown fight. We're now a month into the shutdown. It's going to be the longest shutdown we've ever had. And food stamps got cut this weekend, and Donald Trump doesn't seem to care. He's having his Great Gatsby themed party at Mar-a-Lago. He is saying crazy stuff in 60 Minutes and with Earl Donald, and I don't think he seems to care. And I think that's kind of playing into Republicans' problems because a lot of people can see that he doesn't care. He's not interested. He's building his ballroom in the White House. And I think it's affecting his party's reputation in terms of how serious they are about ending the shutdown and extending healthcare subsidies. And I think that that's helping the Democrats, too. I still think that shutting down the government was a risky move. Democrats might come out on top here. I don't think they're ever going to get healthcare subsidies extended. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think what's likely to happen is that they'll win the elections Tuesday, they'll declare a victory, and they'll either reopen the government or the government will stay closed indefinitely, perhaps until next year. I think at this point, all options are on the table. I do think that Republicans should probably just get rid of the filibuster already. If they did that, if they killed the filibuster, they would be able to pass the continuing resolution with a simple majority. Now, I fully understand that means the healthcare subsidies will get cut, which nobody wants, but they're getting cut anyway. And I don't think we're going to get them back, at least not until Democrats win Congress and are able to convince Donald Trump it's in his interest to bring them back. And so I think the Republicans should just do it because I am thoroughly against the filibuster. I think all of our current problems, Donald Trump's presidency, can be traced back to the filibuster. The filibuster broke the United States government. Before about 2008, 2009, filibusters were just rarely used. They were never really a commonly used tactic. They were used only in extreme circumstances. If there was an extreme nominee for the Supreme Court, let's say, or if there was a bill that you didn't want passed, you filibustered it. And it was a traditional filibuster where you sat and held the floor and spoke for about 20 hours or whatever. That's not how filibusters usually are. What filibusters are, at their core, is just denying of quorum. Denying of cloture, sorry. In the Senate, you need to have all 100 senators agree to move to a vote before you can actually move to a vote and debate. You don't need that in the House. The House just need a majority. But in the Senate, because it's a more, elite body, everyone has to agree to move to a vote. If someone objects to move to a vote and debate, then you need to have 60 people to override that objection. What's been happening since 2008, because former Senate President, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell decided to do this when Barack Obama became president, is that instead of saving the filibuster for just specific circumstances, he decided to filibuster everything that came before the Democratic Senate. So now, instead of using it in rare occasions, they were just using it all the time. To my extreme annoyance, the media went along with it and decided that from now on, that's just the way the Senate works. The Senate now needs 60 votes to pass anything, and that's just the way it is. No one ever entertained the possibility this is not how the government was supposed to function. We just decided that because Mitch McConnell decided one day that this is how the Senate's going to function now, we're just going to live with it. And a lot of really important things did not get done in the last 15 years because, unlike previous to those 15 years, they needed 60 votes to pass. And if we keep doing that, if we keep forcing that, then we're never going to get anywhere. And I understand that, many people who support the filibuster think that it forces compromise. We have not seen that be the case. Former Senator Kirsten Sinema, who was a strong supporter of it, said that it forces compromise, but we have very rarely seen compromise. We saw a little bit of it when Biden was president with the infrastructure bill, but that was largely because Democrats controlled the Senate, and so they were willing to compromise. But when Republicans have the Senate, they never compromise. So we don't really see that working in that way. Instead, what we see is the 60-vote threshold just kills legislation that probably needs to be passed and progress that we need to make, and breaks the government, makes it dysfunctional, makes it unable to function, and has convinced a lot of voters that Congress is just a waste and we don't need it. And that drives people to more authoritarian tendencies. If you want to know why the presidency is becoming more authoritarian, it's because the Senate can't get anything done. And the Senate can't get anything done because it needs 60 votes. So that is why I believe that we should get rid of the filibuster. And I hope that the Republicans do it because they can take the blame for it. But the other thing that happens is, yes, I'm aware that if the Republicans get rid of the filibuster, they will have the ability to pass a lot of really insane stuff. But if they pass this insane stuff, they will lose the next election. One of the reasons why I think Republicans sustain, even while they become increasingly more radical, is that a lot of voters believe that Democrats will just stop them from doing the most radical things. They will provide a check on them. And so they don't have to worry about the Republicans being radical because the filibuster exists, or because states will sue, or, some way, shape, or form the Democrats will save the country from the most extreme elements of the Republican Party. And I think that's why the filibuster needs to go, because the filibuster goes, then Democrats can't save you anymore. You need to vote for them. And so I'm hoping that they do that. And if it doesn't end with the Republicans giving in and extending the healthcare subsidies, which would be the best course of action, but I don't believe that will happen, the next best course of action is for Republicans to just kill the filibuster and govern the way that they want to govern, and let America see the true nature of having a Republican trifecta, and then maybe they'll never vote for one ever again. That's my hope. So that's my opinion, and I know a lot of people disagree with that, and I know a lot of people disagree with some of the opinions I've had recently about the shutdown, but that's why we're here, for me to share it, and that's what I wanted to share with you. So enjoy the election. I'm planning to do a live stream Tuesday night covering the elections. I'll either do it on Substack or I'll do it on Twitter, or both, if I can figure out how to do both. But I'm looking forward to seeing what the maps look like, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the results are, and I'm looking forward to analyzing them. I'll probably do an article analyzing them after the election, and I will see and hear from you then. And also, don't forget, if you haven't yet, my new novel, Lower Than the Angels, is out on Amazon right now, and I'm happy to say that it sold a lot of copies in its first month, so I'm getting a really good feedback from it. And if you haven't picked it up yet, now is a great time to pick it up. And to celebrate Nick Rafter Writes having 100 paid subscribers as of November 1st, there is a special going on right now for Nick Rafter Writes. If you want to become a paid subscriber this month, it's 20% off. I will include a link to that and the book in the write-up below the video. So take a look at that, and I will see you again in my next episode of Here's a Wild Thought.